Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Welcome to the CID talk on Child and Youth Wellbeing Strategic Action Plan. My name is Philippa Smales. I'm the Business Development and Member Engagement Manager here at the Council for International Development. I want to thank you for joining us, and I'm really honoured today to introduce Mereia Carling. She is MFAT Senior Advisor for Inclusive Development, Child and Youth Wellbeing. She will present the purpose, overarching goal, structure and content of the plan, about 30 minutes, and then we have time for Q&A. I apologise, we actually missed the very start of the recording of this session, so we will just launch straight into it.
So in thinking about the board considerations to take, we knew that we wanted to build on what we've already been doing, how we've already been supporting countries and maximise that. So we have always had a substantial education programme, worked in child health, there's been support to UNICEF and a whole range of other contributions towards child and youth wellbeing. So we didn't want to throw that out, we wanted to build on that. We also wanted to target the most impactful investments. New Zealand is not the biggest development partner in the region, so we need to make sure that what we do is impactful and that we didn't spread ourselves too thin, that you couldn't see the outcomes of that investment. So in doing that, we wanted to make sure that we focus where acceleration is most needed or where development progress is most needed. And we also wanted to really be smart about investing at the right time, at the critical points of development over the life cycle. And of course, being aware of what other partners are doing and looking to complement or work where there's gaps in the development effort. And also we wanted to take a child rights based approach. So sort of looking a bit in more detail at those considerations, quite early in the day, I started to introduce this life cycle approach thinking for us at MFAT to start to map out the different, you can't see the small print on this, I'm aware of that, but it's just sort of a diagram, a graph that's taken from the Urban Youth and Pacific report. It shows I guess across the life cycle from prenatal and infancy at the bottom, going through childhood, adolescence and early adulthood, going up the axes. And on the one side, you have risks and sort of the absence of the interventions that you would make for child and youth wellbeing. And that would lead to a pathway of exclusion or risk behaviour. And then on the right-hand side, you have the interventions that you would make across the life cycle to lead towards a pathway to inclusion and positive outcomes. So this was quite a useful way for us to see, where the different parts of our investment have contributed in that life cycle. It could also sort of tell that picture that you needed to sort of sustain that investment over time, because even if you started off in a resilient stage of life, you might, without having the right investments, move towards the pathway of exclusion. Conversely, you could turn a risk situation into a positive outcome at the end of that life cycle. So you can start to tell the story of sustaining investment across the life cycle. And then overlaying that story, you can start to put those very familiar strategic frameworks that I'm sure many of you know about, the nurturing care framework for the early years, holistic child and adolescent development, and an active youth citizenship, and you can start to see how they lead into each other. And if you did that magnificently all the way through the life cycle, you could look at, working towards social, political, and economic empowerment of young people. So that was the story that I wanted to sort of socialise and start to look strategically at MFAT. Looking at if we want to look at what we had been doing at MFAT, I looked at that positive side of investing, all the different things you need to do across the life cycle. And this, I should say here that there is no one way to do this, to assess across the life cycle. I looked to the OECD, and in their comparative analysis, they say that child wellbeing measures the quality of children's lives. However, as simple as the concept sounds, there is no unique university accepted way of actually measuring child wellbeing that emerges from the academic literature. So that was the challenge. But it was also something that I thought, well, let's see how we can do this for MFAT. So we have developed a way of measuring or tracking our investment across the life cycle. And it starts off by sort of clustering sort of 4 broad stages of the life cycle, from the early years through the primary, secondary, tertiary years, and then there's a section for governance as well. And those are sort of structured around the CRS codes, or the creditor reporting system codes, and the thematic markers, the OECD thematic markers. So the early years is structured around the only one thematic marker we have for child and youth wellbeing, which is the reproductive, maternal, neonatal, and child health marker. I call it the REMNACA marker for short. And that is that's structured around 0 to 5 years old, including safe motherhood. And then there's a block for primary years, which is 6 to 12-year-olds, and that's because there are CRS codes for primary education, but it is broader than just education. That looks at also physical health, child protection, nutrition. And similarly, at secondary years, that's because there are CRS codes for secondary education. But in that cluster, there's also mental health that looks at risk behaviour. And then the tertiary years, which it covers employment, youth employment, voice and citizenship, sexual reproductive health. And then there's the governance, which looks at, what with the support we do to countries for all of that life cycle, that system building for life cycle development, which includes the policy development, data support and reporting. So using those sort of 5 categories, I've developed a system working with our amazing data analyst sector, MFAT, and a rule for applying to all of our activity database. And we can start to tell this picture. So this is a picture of our spend across our ODA spend on child and youth wellbeing over the last triennium. It's also in the strategic action plan if you've downloaded that off the website. And it shows that we have nearly 50% of our spend in the early years, which is a good thing. That's what I'm really glad to see. A big chunk of that is in governance, 30%. And in that, that is mostly education and governance, so the policy and administration of education CRS codes. And then you can see there that lesser spend in primary, secondary, and tertiary years. This is a little bit more detail, and again, apologies that this is small, but I'd like to have a look at some of that detail across those 4 life cycle stages. The governance one is not there because it doesn't fit. But just a few points while you're having a look at that is don't be misled by the differing scales on the vertical axes. There's different, the money is different on those different graphs. You will notice that in the tertiary years, there's sexual reproductive health and rights is 0, but that's because it is usually marked to the REMNACA marker, which you'll see in the early years spend, which is big. I haven't yet worked out how to extract the bit that we do for young people, and it just sort of, it's that circle of life. It starts to go back to the beginning. In the early years spend, you'll see that there's a section for other. That comes from a sort of a keyword search. So coupled with the CRS's codes and the marker, I've also used a wide range of keywords to extract out the different contributions. And that comes from a keyword search for, I think I used the words baby, toddler, babies, infants, and they were not marked to the REMNACA marker, but they were doing other things like parenting. In each of the primary, secondary, and tertiary years, education is the biggest spend. And then but also child protection has been growing over the years. So we can now look at this over year by year to see how that changes. We can do this by country and also by modality, see what we do spend with partners, with bilaterally or through multilateral agencies, etc. I'm still working on this, so it's not complete, but so this is fresh off the press for you. But now that we have developed this tracking system, it allows us to at least tell the story of what we do across the life cycle, which has been useful for them, looking at the other considerations. So what do we do now that we know that? I mean, very simplistically, we can look at the deaths per thousand across the life cycle, and we can see quite clearly with that blue line that we want to reduce child mortality, including neonatal and infant mortality, and we want to extend life expectancy. The orange line is New Zealand's line, and the blue is a composite of 10 Pacific Island countries. So that gives a sort of a crude picture of what we want to do. And there's more detail to come. We can also look at, when do we invest, and if we consider how risk and vulnerability is distributed across the life cycle, across these different variables, you can see how that changes over the life cycle. So you want to do the right thing at the right time. For example, if we look at unemployment, you can see that it's a really significant issue for youth and adolescents, but also for parents early in a child's life. So you want to invest where that risk is not high to mitigate that risk coming up. So you want to focus on that in the school years. Similarly, the lack of information and participation, which is a major risk at adolescence. Again, we want to invest before that becomes a risk. When we talk about well-being, which is part of the brief, child and youth well-being, that implies holistic development. So we want to be looking at all those different ways that children develop, which is more than educational, more than physical, but it also is your emotional, mental, spiritual, cognitive ways of developing. Because we know that we can keep a child educated and give them access to health, but if they're unsafe in their homes, then they do not have that well-being that we want, and that their rights to education and health are compromised when their rights to protection are denied. So thinking of well-being means that we need to start looking broadly then at conventional areas of education and health. You won't be able to see the fine print on this page, but it's just really to point to this piece I was showing you before, which is an analysis that was done to look at the situation of children and youth across the life cycle in Pacific Island countries. So it's structured from sort of safe motherhood and birth all the way through to adolescence. It's a selection of about 45 indicators, some of which are sustainable development indicators, and others which are selected because they are what's used in the Pacific and what there is data for, that we have data. And how I've measured that is whether they're worse than the global average. But the SDG indicators already have a rating applied by UNICEF. So that gives us sort of a heat map, a visual, so you can see at a glance how countries are faring and where you might want to focus your attention. For example, this is Cook Islands, and you can see, although there's some orange and red dotted around, there's a big focus at the tertiary years in adolescence and youth around sexual reproductive health and risk behaviour and so forth. And just to contrast that, I'll just flash you a picture of Kiribati page, which looks quite different. There's a lot of orange and red right across the life cycle. So this analysis was done for countries to inform them and with their discussions when they have with their bilateral partners, but also has informed the priorities of the strategic action plan. So now I'll just highlight those priority areas which are taken from the strategic action plan. Those indicators have sort of been looking right across the region to see where the common big areas are. And so we have an area for healthy, safe, supportive and learning. So really bringing in that holistic concept. It focuses on early childhood development. So broadening that out from early childhood education, but really looking at that nurturing care framework around health, nutrition, caregiving, protection. Then there's a focus on keeping children in school, inclusive education, and improving learning outcomes, which is really the work that we have always done in education. So not wanting to change that, but to keep that as a priority in our work. There's a focus on prevention of non-communicable diseases and CDs by focusing programs on adolescent health, which has been shown through the data as being quite a critical area. And that focus on recreation, sport, nutrition, but also mental health, healthy living, and addressing some of that risk behaviour. Tobacco is a major issue in the Pacific, and addressing alcohol abuse. And having a focus on child protection for both primary and adolescents as well, addressing gender-based violence, etc. And then there's a whole priority around realising youth potential, really focusing on youth. It's a focus in the Pacific Youth Development Framework, and that covers sexual reproductive health, keeping youth connected in communities through establishing youth centres, supporting youth centres where they can do life skills training, tertiary education avenues for school leaders, which is a link to our scholarships programme, the part that focuses on school leaders. And then a focus on employment, which is the big issue in the region, employment or entrepreneurship for youth. The other two priority areas in the Strategic Action Plan are sort of structured on that, the duty bearer focus and the rights holder focus. So the duty bearer focus is really around building the systems and strengthening governance for children and youth, focusing on policies, justice systems, data research analysis, the CRC implementation and reporting, but also, especially now with COVID and all sorts of other disasters, but really focusing when we are developing social protection in the region that we have that clear, distinct focus for children and youth. And then the rights holder focus is around the influence that children and youth bring to development. And having a clear focus on empowering children and young people to participate safely in decision-making, development processes and programming. And there's a range of some policy areas there which reflect our other policy priorities and also in the region. So that's the 4 priority areas. How will we deliver? Working in partnership with NGOs is up top as really one of the best ways, because they're NGOs, as you know, working across these areas, and so they're really our critical partners. We also want to support regional mechanisms that provide the technical support to their members. Supporting multilateral institutions will continue. There's a big piece of work around mainstreaming across our sector thematic programs. For example, in infrastructure, the building of youth centres has become something that's working really well, and we'd like to sort of continue that work, but doing this right across the different sectors. And then, of course, you know, working bilaterally, contributing to the development of country 4-year plans and the delivery of those, for making sure that we keep an inclusive focus and trying to influence the process to have more priority on children and youth in those 4-year plans. So that's almost at the end. So we can now align our investment to tell that holistic development across the life cycle story. The aim of the Strategic Action Plan is to be strategic and to see if we can tell that story, measuring the impact of what we do against the comparative analysis of the situation. So at the moment, the spend target is a secondary focus. We don't have a spend target because there really is no established sort of targets. So it will, we have to sort of have a proof of principle to sort of start doing in that aspect. So we will look at this year by year and see how we go. So that's the strategic action plan.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to hear about what's going on and how this is going to work. And I think having the all on 2 pages, and everyone really appreciates having that all on 2 pages, even though my little one is hard to read. Yours is a bigger printout. But just being able to refer straight to that and the different parts it's really handy. So time for questions now. So what I'll do is I'll keep an eye on the chat as well, but please feel free to take yourself off mute and ask away, or put up your hand as well if you'd like. Go for it.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi. I'm speaking from Tonga. And I'm really glad to join this group chat because I'm in the right field that we just talked about. Recently, in early this year, in April, I started my NGO organization called Uluaki Whaiako. So first teachers, parents are the first teachers for their children at home. It's mainly the goal is to work together with the parents on building a better foundation for their children, for their future learning. And I have already started with 2 groups already, 2 groups of parents, one in the eastern side and one in the western side. And I'm hoping to get out as much as I can to reach out to most of the island of Tonga. What we're doing is I'm working with the parents through play approach. So I believe it's easier for me to get through to the parents in play with their children. At the same time, we're doing our learning, our strategy of learning with the children in live interaction. And mainly is to educate them or work with them to have a better positive relationship with their children at home, to build the holistic development of the child, mainly to have a better future, to have a productive individuals to themselves, families and church and the government of Tonga. So so I'm here. Whenever you need me, I can come in, and I have been working with Sabine. I can see Sabine. Hi, Sabine. My remote volunteer from New Zealand. So I'm really glad that New Zealand has been standing by and supporting me.
Sounds like great work. That's really good to hear.
Thank you. And I think this is the first program in Tonga that cater for the parents and the children from 0 to 3 years of age. And can be extended to 5 years of age if those children are at home instead of at the kindergarten base, because it all depends on the family situation and the financial situations and all those. So, but mainly I'm working for the young parents and the children from 0 to 3, and it can be up to 5. And those who are staying at home, moms and grandparents or whoever taking care of the kids.
That's great to hear, and especially that emphasis on play as learning,
Yes.
which would be really appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tara, you have a question. Do you want to speak to your question, or you prefer for me to?
Oh, hi, more than happy to. Kia ora koutou. Hi, thank you, Mereia. That's a huge amount of work you've done. So thank you for all of that. And you know, it's a real vision. My question is just about the programs that have proved really successful, and you know, lessons that have been learned from those programs. And you know, I'm just aware of the importance, but the difficulty of making sure that we can you know, keep on generating benefits from those programs, but also, you know, how we can ensure that something that's worked really well in one place can be offered to people in other settings, so that they can take it up, obviously not in a cookie cutter way, but adapted so that it's appropriate for a different setting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, thanks, Tara. Yeah, I mean, there have been some really great activities and support right across the board that I've seen, and there's a lot as well. And that was the first thing I wanted to do, was to build on it and not to, you know, change or diminish a priority in any of those areas. But what needs to come now is the sort of building a community of practice at MFAT, so we can bring the different players across the board, which previously have sort of operated quite separately from each other, but to start to build that holistic picture that we're all contributing to the life cycle development and extract the learnings from that, so that we can share that across different countries. So there's a lot of work to come. On the strategic action plan, there's a list of sort of what I will do, my work plan on the side, and there's a community of practice there, and that coordination role is really key. So making sure that we have a really good monitoring, evaluation, review and learning system around that to do that. So I will do that.
Thank you. And thank you also to Council for International Development, because fora like this are also really great in terms of sharing ideas. Thanks.
We have a question from Sally. Would you like to speak to your question, Sally?
Sure. Kia ora koutou. I am really happy to be part of the session. Thank you so much for the work that you're leading. It's really exciting to hear. I guess I just would be very keen to hear your thoughts about cross-sharing of not just, I guess, not just projects, but like from the voices of the children and young people throughout the Pacific who are doing incredible work, and how to really sort of amplify their voices and to make that change driven from within. We are working quite a lot in the area of youth mental wellbeing, and I know other people are working in a whole range of other areas, but I'm very, very keen on this idea about, you know, like once we do this great work with children and young people, then having them as their own advocates to then share their voices to others who can sort of connect in with them. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is one of my favourite areas of work, is around child and youth participation. So I've seen how amazingly effective it is, not only in sort of leading to really sharp, great targeted programs, but just in the individual impact on children and young people, and how it feels to be validated as a contributor and how they grow. So I'm really keen to have that as a focus, and to use it as a criteria that we have through mainstreaming in our other work in the sector thematic areas, to ensure that they're informed by the voices of children and young people. I have been having some initial conversations with the Pacific Youth Council, and had it not been for going into level 2 a couple of months ago, I would have been in Auckland having conversations with Pacifica young people and Māori young people and networks here, to get their ideas and thinking around connecting to youth networks in the Pacific as well. And also because, you know, the diaspora Pacific youth is here and needs to be connected here. but also to their Pacific Island countries as well. So I would say that at this moment, I'm really, open to looking for really great ideas to do this. There are youth councils in each of the countries which really need resources and support. There are, different youth groups and child groups, and the different Save the Children, Live and Learn. They all have sort of arms that engage children and young people. So as much as possible, we can bring in these aspects into the program development would be really key. But really strengthening that it's not only just sort of having them in programs, but sort of strengthening the system for that. So governments that have established ways of connecting to children and young people, and I know that's really almost avant-garde for Pacific Island governments, but some governments do have a sort of a partnership agreement, Vanuatu, for instance, with the Youth Council. So really supporting that and ensuring that there still is an independent voice for young people, and that they can, critique the government if they need to, but work in partnership to implement their youth policy. Or it gets more complicated for children being younger, but then we can start to look at participation in schools, looking at child rights clubs in schools or in communities, to bring in that children's voice that can inform the environment where they live. So it's really broad, and I think there are lots of options, and there's certainly lots that have been tried and tested in the Pacific region, but it hasn't been a major feature of development agendas. So I really wanted to make it a feature in this one, and open to your good ideas as well.
Thank you. I forgot to mention I'm from Child Fund. We've got lots of ideas, so very keen to keep that conversation open. Thank you.
Angela, I think you had your hand up before.
Kia ora, yes I did. Thank you for seeing that. Kia ora, Mereia. Thank you so much for that presentation. My question perhaps is just at a slightly higher level, and I'm hoping you can hear me okay.
Yes.
It's about, I suppose, reference to the ICESD, the larger kind of policy framework, and understanding, I suppose, a key message within that policy framework is the importance of an integrated approach to foreign policy. And I'm just wondering how you see this particular plan overlapping with some of the wider reach that the government of Aotearoa has, be it within trade, within defense, and the impact that sometimes the actions that Aotearoa takes on the foreign stage might have on children and youth, and how much you've integrated your thinking around the role that Aotearoa plays in a broader sense, and how that then can either exacerbate and worsen or improve the realities for the children and youth with whom we work.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great question. Yes, the ICESD policy is for all of our development cooperation, and so is the strategic action plan as well. It has had, I guess, that prominently been thinking about the development program, but in looking at our investment, for instance, I did capture in what we call the affirms, the High Commission and discretionary funds, and they actually account for quite a substantial amount of our spend in child and youth wellbeing. And there's some of the best targeted work has been done through the High Commission funds, because they're so responsive. They can respond quite directly to really small groups and networks. And so that was one way, I guess, that we could see the significance of that foreign policy and what we do and how, and the partnership and how it builds up the partnership to bring in a bit more focus on children and young people. I guess also there in the principles, there is the last bullet point there says, keep children and youth safe across all development activity and foreign policy engagement that impacts on their lives. And this comes from in looking at issues around, for example, adoption, which goes through sort of consular and diplomatic parts of the ministry, and there are clear child protection, aspects to that. And so we need to ensure that the strategic action plan encompasses those kinds of issues as well. In the, you mentioned trade and defence. I haven't done much thinking in the defence area. I have had some conversations in the trade with our trade colleagues to look at how do we make sure that our trade is not, we can sort of track that it comes from, safe places, that not using child labour and that kind of thing. So that conversation is starting in the ministry as well. There needs to be more conversations on that. So yeah, it definitely covers the whole scope. I would admit that there needs to be more conversation in that space, but and to understand exactly, that whole scope. So yeah, I can say that for now.
Oh, any more questions? Feel free to just take yourself off mute and ask away.
Can I ask a question? I know I'm here far away from New Zealand, and how can you be able to help me here in Tonga, and in what form? I know we're talking about strategic plan and stuff. So with my little organization, how are we going to collaborate? What benefits do I get out of this? I mean, what can I see? Where can I see myself in the future with you guys?
I guess there's a couple of ways. And I'll just run through them. I guess the main way that MFAT partners with NGOs is through partnering with New Zealand NGOs that have sort of partners in the Pacific. So that could be a way of partnering with a New Zealand NGO that you could then work with, and there's a process of program development, and you could be a part, your organization could be a part of that in the process of, they have a Partnering for Impact program. There's also a Manaki program for smaller funded partnerships with NGOs. Within countries, as I mentioned before, there's the High Commission funds that are discretionary. They're not, so that they're managed in country, and there's always that angle. They're for very small funded projects. There's that. There's, I was thinking of something else. Also, I would say, building up your relationship with the government, because the government determines the priorities for MFAT to respond to. So we don't tell the government what to do. The priority setting happens within countries, and it is a conversation. So it's very much a shared conversation. But the conversations that the government have with their civil society are important in that process, that high-level dialogue. So the more you can influence in country as well, your government, to include that as a focus is important. So there's a few ways there, I would say.
Okay, but this is a great program, because I learned about plans, I learned about the cycle, I learned about different things about from the collaborating within the country. So thank you so much.
I might use my privilege sitting beside you. So, there's quite a few bullet points under that, to deliver this action plan, and some of them are quite broad as well. And I know you've thought about COVID in terms of the implementation, but maybe if you could talk about what you think will be the most difficult one to implement, especially given current context.
Yeah. Well, one that is almost done is that we're just about to introduce a child and youth marker in our system. So that one I can almost put a tick to. Yeah, so that's not your question, I know. Let's see.
You didn't prepare this question.
Yeah. The mainstreaming tools, mainstreaming is hard to do anywhere, and it's you know, it's the way you do mainstreaming differs for the different organizations, and we're working it out at MFAT, but not just for child and youth wellbeing, but for a whole range of things that can be mainstream, like gender, human rights, governance, those kinds of things. And then, you know, you're doing system change at MFAT. So that's a process that is taking time, but it's moving forward. I think coordination is, you know, bringing in all the different parts of the development program together to be coordinated, because there are so many pushes and pulls on what you do and different reasons why you focus in an area. So, you know, it will be a little bit like trying to turn an ocean liner in the sea. I guess that, you know, there's just me and my capacity to do all of this. It's as much as how fast I can go. So that's a challenge, I guess. We're pulling together our safeguarding child protection work. We have safeguarding in different parts of the program. Is really to sort of systematize that really well, so that we can you know, operationalize the strategic action plan and report on it annually and capture that part in it. I'd say the challenge is sort of doing it all. Yeah.
Is it always?
Yeah, but it's all doable. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Any other questions? You've got this amazing resource right here. So
There's a question.
Yeah. Kia ora. Excuse me, sorry, this is Quinelda from Child Fund. Thank you so much for your presentation today, and I'm sorry I was a bit late, but I came in on the slide around the inclusive development and looking at the age groups and sort of what areas you would be targeting for each age group. And Child Fund has, through our negotiated partnership, a big focus on youth wellbeing. And I think one thing that we're noticing is that through our programming is that it's not so clear cut and it's a bit more messy. So in Kiribati, we support a youth program where it's for school leavers. And so they've missed out on a lot of that early education. So a lot of the focus, even for people who could be up to 30, is on some of that primary education. And I'm just wondering how your model and how you're tracking the impact of the work across the Pacific accounts for that kind of messiness. Yeah,
That's such a great example. And, you know, in talking about the strategic action plan and the life cycle approach at MFAT, I've kind of used the youth employment example to say that it is not just about creating jobs for young people, you know, when they're young, but about making sure that they are completing school, or that we are bringing in sort of alternative education for those who are, you know, not in the formal education sector, but also, you know, making sure that going right down to early childhood. So it really is that life cycle story. So when we talk about youth employment, it's making sure that we can tell that story across the life cycle. And you're right, it is messy, but it's an important narrative to talk to. And, you know, it's one that we value, and it's one that we want to, you know, see represented in the strategic action plan as well. So I know that work in Kiribati and Child Fund, it's fantastic, and I love the messy story. So I'm not you know, one that just says, oh, but where are the jobs for young people? Yeah.
So a bit more about education. So James had a question there about explain a bit more about education, the dimension of well-being.
Yeah. Well, it's one part of well-being. That diagram that I had, I'm not sure if you can see the one with the children and the different aspects of development. It's educational development, you know, providing education, but also that social connection for, there's so many things that happen in the school context. There's social development, there's, you know, you can develop your emotional development all within in the school context. So it can be in itself a holistic approach to development as well. I guess, you know, there's many ways we can talk about holistic well-being, and it can be, you know, it's broader than just education and the well-being and holistic approach we do in a school setting, but it's also how we educate in life skills and in a home setting and in a community setting. So there's, you know, both the formal and the informal approaches to well-being in education. In the education team, really looking at the learning outcomes, and that does include, you know, there's the sort of the learning outcomes, but also the soft skills and in schools, the cognitive development, and there is a move in the Pacific region, at least, towards that, you know, broader learning outcomes. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
I hope that answered your question, James. Feel free to. Oh, there we are.
Yeah, kia ora, tēnā whakautu mai. And kia ora tātou, I roti te wā o te reo Māori. Tēnā tātou katoa. So yeah, my question was based around the education being a dimension of wellbeing. I guess all the dimensions that I've sort of looked at in terms of a health perspective was never seen education in there, so that was the reasoning for the answer. Here in the Cook Islands, we actually have an extra dimension in there, which is the environment. I guess from a wellbeing point of view, in terms of what you're discussing today, we're really seeing our environment as being vitally important for the wellbeing of our future generations. So when we're talking about environment here, I guess we're talking about the ability to fish, we're talking about the ability to enjoy our natural environment in its pristine conditions. And so there's a lot of dialogue around the space of things with regards to environmental sort of concerns that are happening here in the Cook Islands. So that was the reason for my answer, for my question, sorry. But thank you for the answer and thank you for today.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And you're absolutely 100% right. It's yeah, it's life skills, how to live in today's world and the world of the future as well, is, you know, our education system should be. So that sounds great.
Fantastic, thank you.
All right, any more questions? We still have a little bit of time, so feel free to take stuff off mute or put something in the chat. A good opportunity. Everyone's being shy.
Well, thank you, Tara.
Thank you for coming through. That's really lovely. All right, well, if there's no more questions, maybe we will let everybody get on with their day.
Thank you, everyone. It's been lovely to chat and meet you all, and come back and tell you more.
We'll as usual, we'll send through an email after this with the link to the recording and any sort of bits and pieces that we'd like to send through for your information. But otherwise, do feel free to go to the link that's up above in the chat and download the actual action plan from the MFAT website. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.